Thank you all. Thank you for coming to this forum on driving in East Hampton. A few thank yous. We want to thank the Springs Improvement Society, who is giving us Oshawa Hall. We certainly want to thank the panel, which I'll introduce. It's Sue Manu, who's an attorney in town who handles all forms of cases and is quite knowledgeable about the court and the situation there. Mark Butler, also an attorney. He's the president of East End for Opportunity. And Kathee Burke-Gonzalez, who, as I think you all know, is on our town council and we'll talk about this later, has been sponsoring a memorializing resolution to support the goals of one of the laws. We're going to discuss the Driver's License Access and Privacy Act. I'm Zachary Cohen. I'm the chair of East End for Opportunity, and I'll moderate. Unfortunately, Peter Van Scoyac had a family emergency out of town, and he is not able to be with us tonight. Okay, so I also, we've done a few of these forums, and I modified the balance a little bit. I have a feeling tonight more people want to know about the proposed law, but we always like to cover what the situation is currently before we go on to that. We'd like you to save your questions for the end, unless you have a really pressing need why you have to ask right then and there, and then we'll go in and do that. So I wanted, in terms of driving now, sort of divided up into sort of what you should be knowledgeable of and what the status is just as you get into the car. And I thought I might start with Sue to say what are some of the things that one should be cognizant of before they even turn the key.
Right. Well, once a police officer stops you, particularly if you're undocumented and do not have a license, then there already is a problem, because most likely he will be able to identify and then will ask for your license and registration, and if you don't have that, he'll be able to ticket you for driving without a license. And then there's some additional things that he can charge you with depending upon the reason that he stopped you. Now, he only can stop anyone, any of us, for a reason. He can't just see someone driving down the road, technically, and stop that car. We all know that sometimes that does happen, that there is no reason to stop, but people are stopped. But people, particularly undocumented or any of us, can really take a point to be careful before you get in your car, before you drive, to make sure that you're not giving the police officer a reason to stop you. And some of those things are, and I spoke to Michael Sarlo about, because I was objecting to the fact that I felt that there were a lot of undocumented people being stopped out of proportion to the general stops. And Chief Sarlo said to me that, well, I've been keeping track of that, and there are a lot of reasons why people are stopped. For example, dice hanging from your mirror, things like that. That's a reason that you can be stopped, because it's technically obstructing your view. So before anyone should get into their car, particularly people who do not have a driver's license, they should just check the car. Make sure that your license plates are clean, that they're clear, that there's nothing covering them up. Make sure that all, and this is an important one, make sure all your lights are in working order. I can't tell you how often some of my clients who do not have driver's licenses are stopped because one headlight or one brake light is off. So make sure all of that is working. And in your glove compartment, we should all have a copy of our registration and insurance card. Now, even undocumented people can have a registration on their car, and they must have it because that's a reason they can be stopped. The police can see that a million miles away, and an insurance card. Then you should always keep a phone number of an attorney and any emergency contact. If you're driving and you are going to be arrested, you can call a friend and have them pick up the car unless the police take the car. If the police take the car, there are methods that your attorney can tell you of how to get the car back. Be very, very careful how you signal your turns. One reason I'm seeing that police are stopping people, which I've never been stopped for this, and my kids say I drive all over the road, is taking a wide turn, and when you turn, and going over the line. Misuse of high beams. You're driving at night, you have your high beams on, you go around a corner, and you forget to lower them. Police love to stop people for that. Of course, drinking and driving. People think, oh, I can have 1 drink or 2 drinks, and that's true, you can. If you're undocumented, you should not even smell alcohol before you get in a car, because that's a reason. Police say they can smell it from forever. I don't know how that's true, but certainly beer and things like that do smell. But driving without a license and drinking, there's no excuse for that, really. There's just no excuse. If you don't have a driver's license, then there's no excuse for driving and drinking. Aggravated unlicensed operation. What we don't want to see have happen to any of us, but we really don't want to have to see happening to undocumented people, is to get arrested and to go over into the Riverhead jail. Because if you go into the Riverhead jail and you have a Latino surname, there's a very good chance that the corrections officers will check to see if you have an ICE warrant. Now, there's some discussion as to whether or not they are calling, if you are arrested and you're undocumented and you do not have an ICE warrant, do they call from the jail and give your name when all of a sudden an ICE warrant will miraculously drop? So none of us know the answer to that. Some of the corrections officers, and I think that the new sheriff is sensitive to this issue, so I don't think that is happening often. But it does happen, so what you must do is avoid, under all circumstances, of going into the jail. One thing you can do is have bail money available. People who are documented don't think about that. But if you go into the court, in any of our courts, and the judge puts $500 bail on you, or $250, that's their favorite amount of bail, for not a serious crime, and you cannot make that bail, they will take you to Riverhead, just for that small amount of bail. So it's always good to carry that amount of money in your car or somewhere.
So to make that more precise, when you're saying Riverhead, that's the county jail.
The county
so
jail.
People understand that that's not another form of a town jail. That's now the county jail.
Yes. So if you can't make your bail, they'll and if you say, if you're undocumented and you say, or any of us, and say, I don't have $500 or $250 or $1,000, whatever it is, but my mother, my father, my friend can bring that over, the police officers here will cooperate and they will keep you here in East Hampton or in the village, will keep you until someone comes down and posts that bail to preclude being taken over into Riverhead. But once you're in Riverhead, then there is a problem. Driving without a license is a simple fine. It's not a crime. It's called 509. That's a violation of the penal of the traffic VTL code. 509 is driving without a license. Then you drive without a license again and again, which people do because they're going to work. They can't do that. Because if you get what's known as the 511-2A, and Edmondson knows this, then there's 2 things that can happen if you're convicted of that particular crime. That is a crime. That's a misdemeanor. 1, the judge must, he doesn't have a choice, he must do one of 2 things, either put you on probation or send you to jail for a period of time. He can send you to jail for a week, he can send you to jail for 2 weeks, he can send you to jail for a year. Normally, they'll put you in jail for a short amount of time with that traffic situation. However,
yeah.
Can I jump in for a
Yeah.
sec?
Yeah.
So just stepping back a little bit, so what we talked about, or you'd mentioned that there's, what are the most common reasons why you would be pulled over by a police officer? And it could be for a moving violation, right? You're speeding, you've, gone through a stop sign or a red light. And also equipment violation,
Right.
which you mentioned a few things, but I think folks should also know. So you talked about lights, a light being out. or if they only have one license plate as opposed to two,
Right.
that's an equipment violation, or they're missing a mirror. I mean, I think
Right.
it's helpful for folks to know, like, as far as what equipment violations are too, when you get,
Right.
when you can get
Well,
pulled
those are the
over.
reasons to stop you.
Right.
Kathee, I had a question. You might know, from police enforcement in East Hampton, do the police ask about immigration status, or is that part of the policy of East Hampton to make sure they don't?
No, and I can just speak anecdotally, because I'm a council person, not a police officer. But typically, as, Sue said, when you get pulled over, you're asked for three things: your license, your registration, and your insurance card. And sometimes, officers will say, I need to see your paperwork, and sometimes there's confusion with that language, but paperwork means those three things: license, registration, and insurance card. It doesn't mean, any other kind of papers that they're looking to see.
And just one other thing I just want to mention is police officers and police officers can ask to search your car. You can say no. They can't search your car without a reason. They then usually come up with a reason, but you can say no. Normally, if someone says, "May I search your car?" even though you know that legally you have a right to say no, you just don't do it. It's like, oh, if you want a lawyer, you must be guilty. Well, if you won't let me search your car, then there must be something hidden in here. So no one should ever, particularly if you're undocumented, ever have alcohol, open, or marijuana in the car, ever, ever, ever. Police say they can smell the marijuana even if it's in the trunk. Maybe they can, I don't know. But you don't have to submit to the search, but they will have a reason. And now the police here in East Hampton are having people sign a document at the time, which I find to be a problem, saying that I gave consent to search. Well, if a police officer says, "Will you sign this document saying it's okay to search?" you're scared, you're going to say yes, but that's something to discuss with the police, that they're handing that over. It just makes their proof easier, then they don't have to say it's an unconstitutional search.
Is the consent in Spanish?
Yes.
And what about a breathalyzer? What happens if you refuse a breathalyzer?
If you refuse a breathalyzer, and people will call you if they have your number from the jail, or when you're arrested, and say, "Should I take the test?" I think lawyers always say one of two things. If you've only had a couple of drinks and you're not very intoxicated, take the test. If you're smashed and really intoxicated, do not take the test. Now, the ramifications for a person with a license of refusing that is that you do not qualify for a conditional license. This doesn't affect undocumented people because they don't have a license anyway. So if you've been drinking and you've been driving, and if you're undocumented and you're drinking and driving, you're out of your mind.
We do not condone that.
Let alone anyone else who could cause an accident and kill a child who runs, even if it's the kid's fault, runs in front of the car. We all know that.
So it sounds like you and other attorneys who work in this area, and maybe Mark, we need to have a 24-hour hotline to take calls at any hour when people need some advice if they get stopped.
Well, usually they can't make that call during the stop, is the
yes,
problem.
I know.
Well, yeah, well, once they get back to the station, they can call and say, "Can someone bring me bail if there's going to be bail?" Sometimes they do station house bail, $100. Now there's a whole law about to be passed where they can't put any bail on people. So we'll see if that passes.
Well, people should know too that if you've decided to drive in this state or any state, you have given implied consent to the police to test you for any number of ways. They can take your blood, they can take your saliva. I mean, so there are 3 or 4 different tests that they can, and you have consented to that by using the roads in the state of New York, just so you know that.
So to wrap this section up, but to try to direct it towards the new law, Sue, in court, how frequently do you see driving without a license as an accompanying violation issue with the primary reason why they were stopped and have been brought to court? Is it
Well,
frequent?
there's no way, and if a lawyer sees someone come into court and the only ticket they have is driving without a license,
Well,
well,
I understand, but how frequently is the driving without a license connected with other violations that have brought them in?
it has to be, because there's no reason to
I
stop
understand,
someone.
but they're brought in with some other violation.
Yeah.
Is it frequent that you're also seeing this driving without a license?
Oh, yes.
And it's complicated, and
Yes.
does it cause additional penalties, complications for the, you want to say one of your clients?
Well,
Person in
you
court?
mean, if they have equipment violations and they also have a driving without a license?
That's correct.
Then, here's what the courts hate. They don't like someone who passes a school bus. That's a traffic violation. They don't like someone who passes on the right. That's a traffic violation. But if you simply have a highlight beam or a headlight out, one, you can fix it. I just got 2 tickets dismissed last week because I had the proof that the person who got those 2 tickets had gotten them corrected. So the answer is, serious things that are unsafe do impact, but when you go into court, you talk to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor will say, okay, if you plead guilty to the driving without a license, I will drop the tickets for no headlights or for the beams. But it's a way for the town to get money, so sometimes they don't want to drop that. And each jurisdiction is different. Southampton is a lot easier on those sorts of things, and their fines seem to be lower than they do in East Hampton.
Okay,
Does that answer your question
you some.
somewhat?
I'm trying to ascertain whether it would unclog the courts a little bit, move things along some, if the driving without a license was more or less eliminated from what it is now.
Completely.
Well, that's what I was
Unclog the
trying-
court. I'm sorry, I didn't
Yeah.
understand that.
So that it'd be much simpler if someone just comes in and they passed on the right, and that was the only part of their violation, versus if they come in, passed on the right, and driving without a license, it becomes a much more complicated issue.
Right
And
now-
that complication would be greatly reduced if that person could have a license.
I think it'll be very interesting to see the number of Latinos that are pulled over now for these things hanging from the lights, for no headlights, for this or for that, and how many are pulled over after this law passes that gives people driver's licenses. It's going to fall down to next to nothing, because they're not going to be, it's like me swerving all over, I don't really swerve all over the road, but
Yeah, you might
if
like
you see
follow
me
that
coming,
if you-
but, they're going to stop these arrests. They're not going to see someone who looks Latino driving down the road and have a reason to know that they're unlicensed.
Okay, so let's move on, and we'll try to talk about why this is a important, we'll call it a law. They called it the Driver's License Access and Privacy Act before both the New York State Senate and the Assembly. I want to make just a couple statements to try to avoid some confusion. A number of times this is referred to as green light, and Green Light is a coalition of organizations that have been working for passage of this law for many years, actually. But that isn't the name of the law. And we're an example of an organization, and there are several others, organizations, individuals, who work cooperatively with them, but we are not part of the coalition, partially because we want to very strongly show that we're doing this East End for Opportunity because we feel it's a benefit to everybody in the community, not just the undocumented immigrants. And but many people, we do work very cooperatively together. So you will see us and some others refer the town board to the actual name of the law. And then you'll see other people, when they say green light, they're referring to this law also, but they're probably a member of that coalition or working with them. And so how about either Mark or Kathee? You can jump in and talk about why this isn't really a new law.
Well, I'll say a few words on that. For approximately 90 years in New York State, there was no need for anyone applying for a license to do anything other than show a piece of paper that showed their age and identity. So until approximately 2002, you were able to drive in New York with just that and didn't have to prove your immigration status. After 9/11, things changed. People got very nervous, and Governor Pataki put the new law in requiring proof of immigration status. And that was about 5 years later. Governor Spitzer tried to do what is trying to be done now, which is change that law, and was unable to do it at that time, but came pretty close. Many other states, though, 12 other states, starting around 2005 and 2006, but especially around 2012 and 13, 12 other states have passed laws which do not require proof of immigration status to obtain a driver's license. This is of the three different kinds of license, and I don't know, Kathee, do you want to go into that? There are three different types of licenses. The real ID, there's a second license and then a third license, and this is a standard license, which is the lowest form of a license. That is what we're talking about when we're talking about issuing this type of license to an undocumented immigrant. And this, a standard license would have a notation there that said it's not to be used for any federal purposes, which would include getting on an airplane, voting, and any other purpose other than driving. And that would require some education and make sure, TSA and others would accept it. But the other states have done it, and it's worked. So that's the background, and that brings us to this law and whether this makes sense to do or not. And do we want to go into the advantage, Kathee?
Well, I was going to say is that I
right.
really appreciated the editorial in the Star that, and that, entitled "State Should Reinstate Licenses for the Undocumented," because I think we need to keep driving home the point that it's reinstate, that, New York State, as you said, for 90 years had that law on the books. The Siena College Research Institute actually back in March did a poll and asked folks in New York State whether, they should allow undocumented immigrants to get a New York driver's license, and only 34% supported it, and 61% opposed it. And I think part of it is just there needs to be an education process. I think just, asking that question, like naked, people, their response, over the state, although I will say that since back in April, and I introduced a memorializing resolution supporting driver's licenses for all. The folks that I come in contact with are very supportive of it. So I think it's probably, there's a geography, to it. New York City, they had a higher, more people were supportive when they did the poll as opposed to folks that lived upstate. And so I think education, and that's what, it's important for, like the panel like we're having right now, to get the word out. And Mark, we really appreciated your coming to the town board work session last week and giving an overview of the law and the pros and the cons and what people's concerns are, because we do need to educate the community on what this, is all about and how important it is.
Would you like me to summarize the?
I think we want to talk, we need, part of is education. Though I'll add a couple of quick comments here, which is up until March, the New York State, both the Assembly and the Senate, were predominantly working on passing the budget, which is due April 1st. And there's been a big push of education and a number of editorials since then. We've seen an editorial supporting the law out of the New York Times. We've seen one in East Hampton Press, Southampton Press, and I think thanks to your invitation last Tuesday, I'll go out on a limb and say that maybe influenced the editors at the Star, and we saw an editorial there in support 2 days later. I have a feeling if they did the poll again, there'd be a fairly large difference in a positive attitude from what it was in March. Thanking to the town boards in New York and the East End where they've been active. Yeah.
Well,
yes, but we
I also
want to
think,
educate.
well, I'll just pick up on Kathy's point about upstate, downstate. I've been doing a lot of reading about the relative support in places, and I think what's happening now is that people are beginning to recognize that the upstate issue is far more of a problem than even this area, in that you really, because of the distances and because of the agricultural and because of the types of people that need to be working and driving where there's no public transportation and whatever, it's critical that they have, and to get to hospitals and to get to grocery store, they need to drive because of the distances. So it's becoming more apparent, even upstate, that this is an issue. But to brief, I think most people have that have been following this know what the advantages are, and they are quickly. We're going to have licensed, tested, insured drivers. We're going to have registered and tested cars. There's going to be more insured drivers rather than uninsured drivers. It's shown that fatalities go down, that hit and run accidents go down, so safety increases. It becomes easier for the police, becomes easier for the court system. Susan's just given you examples of how that's the case. There have been objections as to whether or not giving this type of documentation will increase voter fraud or any other types of bank fraud, and the experience from studies that have been done in numerous states, because what I want to remind people, we're not pioneers here in the state. This has been done in 12 other states. 12 states are now considering it. The 12 states that have put it in, some of them have been doing this for the majority. The average is probably 8 years or 9 years, and they've run studies, and the studies have concluded that all of the things that I've just named, as far as the fraud and the uninsurance, for instance, in New Mexico, there's a study that showed that over a 10-year period, the uninsured rate went from 34% to 9%. So there are numerous studies about hit and run, about fatalities, about alcohol-related accidents. It's all there, the facts are there, and people can read that and what the effects of that. And as Sue has said, it's not as if we're talking about border security. ICE has a spokesman, which I've quoted there, has said that ICE is not concerned about a state's decision whether to pass a law like this and to give these licenses to undocumented immigrants. That is not their remit. They are concerned with border security, national security, and giving this license is not something that they are going to opine on. So there have been objections, which I try to raise, about people who will say, if someone's here illegally, then they have no right to get a driving privilege. That will lead to other things. Why are you giving privileges to people who are here illegally? My grandparents came to this country. They came in legally, and anybody here that's here, illegally does. And that's a point of view. But I think it ignores the fact that if you look out the window, even here, you can see that undocumented immigrants are here. They're driving. It's unsafe. And this is a community problem, and we can solve this problem And I would suggest that giving licenses would be a way to do it.
Because, can I just,
Yes,
because
I
we're
was
all
gonna say we
sharing the
wanna-
road, right?
yeah.
So it makes perfect sense to have folks go in, get eye tested, take the permit test, take driving lessons, learn my kids are, 18 and 21. So we've just recently gone through that, where they had to study for the permit test, so that they know when you get to an intersection, who has the right of way. It's just, and you don't pass on the right, and all kinds of things. So I think it's just, to me, it's kind of a no-brainer that you'd want folks to be eye tested, take the test, permit test, take a road test, and get their license, because again, we're all sharing the roads.
Going back to some of the advantages, here's one I think all three of you might have a point of view on, one of which is if the undocumented immigrants could get a driver's license, do you feel it will increase cooperation with law enforcement, both in traffic situations and just in general?
I would think, Sue, you
Yeah.
probably would.
Once the fear of going to jail is taken away, I would think that, already though, I think that if they're stopped by the police, I think undocumented people, unless they're highly intoxicated, are already very cooperative with the police. Maybe what you're speaking about is more if there's calling someone to the house to check on things.
Well, I was asking both because I have heard cases that one of the issues is establishing residency and identity, and people don't usually drive around with a copy of their lease and other things that establish that they're really a resident here, and that you can have a different dynamic that gets set up when you easily can show a person from law enforcement that you live here, you're part of the community, things like that.
Well, I also hear anecdotally that sometimes if an undocumented driver gets pulled over, that they may give somebody else's name, right? As I know my brother back in the day, one of his buddies had a suspended license, and when he got pulled over, he gave my brother's name, and that caused a whole
Sure.
rash of hiring an attorney, going to court.
Right.
And I believe we see that in our courts too, where folks might use somebody else's name who they know have a license because they're scared or they're concerned.
I personally haven't seen that. I mean, I can imagine that
Yeah.
happening, but as I said, I think that for the most part, the undocumented people that are working in our community are very cooperative with the police. Maybe not on certain things like calling someone to the house if there's an altercation or things like that, but if they're stopped by the police, they're not going to go jump in the lake to the police officer. They're going to be nice and polite, and that's another thing. When they go to court, that matters. When you go to East Hampton Justice Court, one judge is very particular. He wants everyone to be dressed very nicely when they go to court, which is respectful, and he's right. And now everyone should be knowing this, so to wear a collared shirt and to wear a jacket, and that impresses the court. It makes an enormous difference of how you present yourself in court and how you present yourself to the police officer when he stops you. Because after all, he does have a choice. He can bring you into the station and question you there, or he can just be, if you're polite and nice as can be, police officers can be more inclined to give you your ticket and send you on your way.
So an issue that's also raised, revenue, that we didn't touch on, right? Mark, do you want to comment on?
The estimate for New York in terms of revenue, and that's a very important point, because one of the objections is that this is going to be an expense and a burden to the taxpayers, and the opposite is the case. They estimate that the first year that this is in place, it will result in about $24 million worth of revenue, and then annually it will mean about $57 million. I also point out, as I did in front of the town board, that the undocumented immigrants in the state of New York comprise about 5% of the workforce, and they pay over $1 billion in state and local taxes. So this is revenue neutral. In fact, I'll go a step further. It's supposed to, it is estimated that this will reduce your insurance premiums approximately for each individual about $17. So that's the money part of this, to put that to rest.
So there have been some concerns raised mainly by police chiefs, both locally and across the state, about the wanting to see refinements in the law. And maybe Kathee might want to start on that, on why at the moment that you are putting forward a memorializing resolution as opposed to support of the law, and what's going on, what some of these concerns are.
Right. Well, the law is still in committee in the Assembly. And there are 4 sections, sections 9, 10, 11, and 12, where and I'm, again, I'm not a law enforcement official, but from what I'm hearing from the chief, where there's confusion about where the law states that they can't look at any databases or indices. So if I were, speeding and I got pulled over, if I show them my license, they can go into the DMV database and pull it up and see what my driving record is, right? If I've ever had, I've got a speeding ticket on there or I've got a clean record. If I'm driving and I get pulled over and I'm an undocumented immigrant, the way the law was written now, the way the law enforcement was interpreting it, they couldn't look at the DMV database. So that presented a problem. And it's my understanding, after talking to Assemblyman Thiel, that that wasn't the intent of the law. There's no intent for, so law enforcement wants to be able to access the DMV database. They want to be able to make identifications, but they are not interested in seeing, if the standard license goes into effect, what papers were provided in order to get the standard license. They're not interested in a person's immigration status. They just would like access to the DMV records, which, makes sense, and that was apparently the intent all along, it seems.
Right, and we understand correctly that there is discussion about making these changes now?
Yes, yeah, and they said it would be a few weeks, but I think the intent is still to get
Mark,
this.
you've seen Chief Sarlo, Chief of Police for the town of East Hampton, sent us some of his concerns. You've seen those.
Chief Tracy or Chief Sarlo?
Chief Sarlo was the one who actually sent us those concerns, and Chief Tracy on the past forum spoke about them.
Yes, well, I've seen the concerns, and the only thing I have to say on that subject, to add to Kathy's points, is that 12 states have passed this already and have it operating, and are very happy with the way they're solving the problem of identification after these stops. So New York is on a well-traveled road, which they'll take advantage of, and they'll make sure that they put into the drafting the protections that they need for law enforcement, I'm sure.
Very good. And on that, in terms of that timing, what I understand from a conference call today, that Assemblyman, is it Hasty, who's the Speaker for the Assembly, plans to bring this law forward in the beginning of June, timing in with these changes towards the end of May. And it does appear that the votes are definitely there in the Assembly to...
I think the bill has like 90 sponsors in the Assembly. I
Yeah.
mean, it's got a very strong in the Assembly. Where there's concern is in the Senate.
Yeah, going back, talking a little about the geography, and then if people want to get involved, what they can do. My understanding is that some of the difficulties is with the senators in the suburban areas, especially central Long Island and to some degree Westchester. but a lot of work is being done locally here in East Hampton, calling all 6 of the actually Democrat senators. And if people wanted to express their opinion, pro or con, whatever, on the table, there's a few copies of a list of all the senators of Long Island and their phone numbers, the number of the bill. You can Google it, and it can come up. It's about 10 pages long. It's a little complicated because it is not just about this license. New York State is having to revise all of their licensing to conform with the Federal Real ID Act. So this bill is also talking about what's going to be called the enhanced license and the Real ID license. And let's see, we're pretty far along to where we could take some questions. And Kathee, though, I'll say one thing.
Sure.
Are you planning on voting tomorrow night,
Yes,
do you think?
yes. We're going to vote on the memorializing resolution tomorrow night, 6 o'clock. May
Six
6,
o-
yeah,
six-
6:30, I'm sorry,
6:30,
May
okay.
16th.
So that's another place people who want to voice their opinion can come.
Yes,
and say.
absolutely.
So do we have anything else from the panel, or are we willing to open up to a few questions? Somebody has to have a question, but.
Loring never
Lauren,
fails.
Lauren, hold on, you're going to be given a microphone.
I don't need a microphone, I have.
Well, he needs a microphone because that gets you recorded. That gets you recorded. And
Hello.
You could start.
You're fine, you're fine, you're fine.
No, I don't want to ask questions, I just want to emote. Although I am in full support of this legislation, there are many people who are not. And I don't think we really are there any negative implications to this legislation? And if so, what are they?
Well, the most negative sentiment that you hear is that immigrants to this country who have come in without proper documentation are here illegally, and therefore they do not deserve any privileges, and that people who feel that they do or who help them get privileges are aiding and abetting criminals. I know Sue doesn't like me to use that word, but that's what the objectors, those are the words that are used by the people objecting. That this is something that shouldn't happen. That it will lead to fraud. It'll lead to all sorts of voter fraud, bank fraud, all sorts of. This is the first step toward a path to citizenship, which it shouldn't be. There is no comprehensive reform in this country, and there should be comprehensive immigration reform and border reform. This should be part of it. And why don't we wait for the Democrats and the Republicans to get together and to have a comprehensive bill in Washington, and then we throw this in, and then it will become part of the whole gestalt of the immigration policy. So if you want to wait for that, then we can have accidents all over the place. We can have fatalities, hit and runs. We can keep doing all that until we see this wonderful nirvana happen down in Washington, which is not likely soon.
Let me ask you since I know what a thorough researcher you are, and this exists in 12 other states, and in some states it's existed over 10 years in a few of the states. Has any of the people who bring up these objections been able to show a single statistic that shows that any of these negative consequences have happened, like fraud or anything?
No, just the opposite.
Yeah, exactly.
Just the opposite.
Right.
All the studies show that none of those things have happened, and that those are not the issues that we should be focused on, based on studies and facts.
So that comes to the point of saying you're entitled to your opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts.
Right,
So
exactly.
the fact is that this is good for everyone, it's good for safety. It doesn't make, the negative consequences are not there. And in fact, the alternative is true. The negatives are immense, and not just to the person who is here illegally, but to all of us driving, let alone the revenue that you spoke of, Mark, so.
Okay,
I think we have-
good. We have Arlene.
All right. I can think of two questions I wanted to ask. One is, I'm curious to know if in our high schools now, children who are children of undocumented immigrants, are they allowed to take driver's ed so that if the law changes, they would have had the education in order to become a safe driver? Are they allowed to take?
I don't know the answer to that, but now you have to pay for driver's ed?
Yes.
I could call my son, who's a driver's ed teacher now.
Because
I don't know
I
the
think
answer
they
to that.
shouldn't be excluded, even though they may not be able to get a license. I think it would be important for them to
Right.
still have that education.
Right.
And the other question that I had is, I'm just curious to know, what is the experience in Europe? Are undocumented immigrants allowed to drive in European countries like France or Germany or Greece or whatever?
That's
Does
a very good
anybody know?
question. I do not know the answer to that.
You-
We'll have to look into that.
Yeah, and as
I-
far as high school students are concerned, you need your permit to take driver's ed. So if you don't have a permit, you can't, so I would imagine if you, you know.
Arlene allows me to give one anecdote. My wife and I, we have a friend who came from Ecuador, and he's legal, but he had a driver's license from Ecuador, and he was here legally, and he's smart as can be. But he said he became a significantly better driver when he had to go through the New York State process and study the books and study the laws here, and just because the laws are also different. You know, he was always trying to be law-abiding, but he didn't even know how the laws differed, and he found it a valuable experience to have to get a New York State license when he came here.
I mean, like stop signs are not suggestions.
That reminds me more of when we tried to vacation in Rome, and they decided that if you drive on the sidewalk, and no problem, you don't stop. You never stop in Rome, especially if it's getting home, for midday lunch.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, other questions? Is that it? Are we gonna? This is a fast, quick forum. It wasn't even a full hour. Is that it? Well, we have good. We have another.
My name is Michael Hansen. I live in Waynescott. I'm all for this legislation. My concern is not unlicensed, but licensed drivers here. I parked my car at the church, and as I'm crossing the street, this sedan, this small car, rather, was whipping around the corner, and I throw up my hands, and I see her apply the brakes because, the stop sign is right there. Anything to make driving safer out here, I support.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you coming for Waynescott as a person who feels there's a little bit too much balkanization of the hamlets. We're very, very happy to have somebody come. Yes, and so on that though, we'll say there on the table by the door there are some handouts that include a one we call Before You Drive, which would say part one of the forum, and then there's also by the door was this is the presentation Mark made for East End for Opportunity, but it was mainly Mark, and he did a great job last Tuesday at the town board meeting, and it lays out most of what we talked about. I am the reluctant webmaster of East End for Opportunities, www.efo.org, and I haven't gone into it in about a year and a half, but maybe I'll.
Right, I was hoping, can you upload these handouts onto your website?
I will upload these. I will send them on to other places that will upload them. On the little table over there, we have a few copies of the memorializing resolution that Kathee is bringing forward tomorrow night. And also, there is a few copies of the names of Democratic senators who haven't said they would say yes and haven't said they would say no. And if you wish to call them and express an opinion, and it gives the number of the bill, both the Assembly bill and the Senate, which are identical, so you don't read both of them. And that's about it, and we thank you, and we hope that you will also tell others about this, and
Drive safely.
yes. Thank you very much.